Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. Joining us as always, this time on Christmas Eve, or really the day before, Andrew Malcolm, the Prince of Twitter, the Regent of RedState.com, Santa Claus by other means. Andrew, welcome back.
There seems to be there's a serious threat. I saw a cartoon online. The reindeer were sitting down there having a sit-down strike, and they sent Rudolph over to negotiate with Santa. They said they wanted to work from home this year.
Santa Claus better get Joe Biden to negotiate for him. I mean, you saw where they changed the contract so that they could work from, I think it's like 42,000 different federal employees can now work from home until 2029. Oh. Yeah, this is, I don't know about the contract. That might get challenged. But of course, the big story right now is all of the clemencies and the commutations of the death penalties for most death row prisoners, not all of them, as well as the 1,500 commutations that Biden issued, some of which involved some pretty sleazy characters. The judge that basically sold kids into slavery in the Kids for Cash scandal in Pennsylvania was one of them. And there were others. There's others that were actually violent criminals that got their sentences commuted by Joe Biden. The one this week, though, of course, is the one with the commuting the death penalty defendants to life without parole.
Federal.
The federal ones. There's 37 of them. We only had 40 prisoners on federal death row to start with. Now we only have 3. And Joe Biden was talking about how he was, doing this out of principle. But I mean, if you're doing it out of principle, you would commute all 40 sentences, right? Because if the issue is the death penalty, why have 3 of these prisoners still on death row? Well, the reason is because they are they're political dynamite. One's the Boston Marathon bomber, and the other 2 are white supremacists that committed mass murder, which if you're not going to commute their sentences, it undercuts the whole idea that you're doing this out of principle against the death penalty.
I mean, what you're hinting at is that Joe Biden is saying things he doesn't really mean.
I'm not even sure he's saying things he can actually comprehend. I mean, that was Tom Cotton's argument, saying, can we reverse these on the basis of incompetency? And the answer to that is no. I have a long post that just went up as we're recording this about that. It's fixable, but not with these particular actions. We can do something to prevent them in the future. But I mean, this is an example of what happens. This is what you get when you get somebody in there who is non compos mentis, right? We don't know who's saying these things. We don't know who's coming up with these ideas.
Yeah, although somebody else.
Well, they're stupid enough to be a Joe Biden production. Let's face it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's the arrogance is just. You can argue. There's a fair argument on death penalty that a civilized society shouldn't be taking the life of someone intentionally. On the other hand, when you see some of these cases, and I won't go into detail here, but I did a long takeout for the New York Times some years back on death penalty and how defense lawyers intentionally plant mistakes in their work as a defense attorney throughout the level of court cases so that there's something to appeal for the next level, stalls it out. And one of the cases I wrote about was 22 years in Montana. And I talked to the attorneys and they said, yeah, they were intentionally stretching it out. As it happens, ironically, some years later, I was an official government witness at the execution of the guy that I had written about. The decision is, a lot of people have problems with the death penalty, and Joe Biden says he does. I'm not sure that's real, but or he knows what he's saying. But um, I talked to a lot of prosecutors, and what they said was they didn't like the idea, but then when they saw some of the cases, I mean, I won't describe them, but they said it's just some few individuals do such exaggerated, awful things that they have forfeited their right to live in a civilized society. And
Yeah.
this is Joe Biden overriding a jury of their peers in 37 cases, or judges. And then, of course, there were alternates. So it was 37 times 12. And the alternates and the victims and the victims' families, all their cases and all their closures. And he's just changing that. It's the arrogance is overwhelming, not surprising from this man, but disappointing.
You know, I'm not sure you were living in California at the time. Were you living in California when Rose Bird got recalled, along with 3 of the other justices on the California Supreme Court?
No. Yeah. No.
But are you aware of the? Are you aware of the?
No.
Okay, so in California, this is, and again, this is a state level, not at a federal level. Rose Bird was the Supreme Court, I think was the California Supreme Court Chief Justice, if I recall correctly at the time. And she had basically unilaterally decided that she was never going to allow, executions to take place in California, and would rule against as much as she possibly could. And she and a couple of other jurists on the state Supreme Court routinely blocked these executions. I mean, I don't know that they allowed a single one to get by. Once California reestablished the death penalty, because of course the Supreme Court had thrown it out in 1972, automatically commuted the sentences to life. And they didn't have life without parole at the time. So that's the reason why the Manson family members kept coming up for parole every 2 years, was because of the federal Supreme Court throwing out the death penalty in 1972. So the Supreme Court reconsidered it, I think, in 1976, and California reestablished theirs based on the new parameters that had to be in place, where I think the juries had to be unanimous on the thing. It had to be a jury decision, that sort of thing.
And it had to be, I think, extreme, right?
I think that there was some sort of requirement that it had to be outside the norm, but I can't really recall that from the Supreme Court. But at any rate, California reestablished the death penalty, I think by referendum, if I'm not mistaken, because it was very popular at the time. And really honestly, to an extent, it still is popular. That's when Rose Bird basically decided she was going to be a goalie and not let anybody get into the gas chamber, right? So she's doing the goalie thing, all these cases. And people got fed up, and they recalled her and three other justices on the state Supreme Court over it.
Wow.
And it was, it was actually kind of a big political deal. This is at the same time that Jerry Brown is exiting office, I believe. And I think it was Duke Majan was the next governor in California. So early 80s, maybe in 1982. There's a will for this death penalty. And you can argue, right, that maybe we shouldn't have it. I think that there's a principled position for that. But that principled position is, universal, right? If you're saying that the state should not be allowed to execute prisoners, that has to fit every single circumstance, right? I mean, you could say that, you could argue in opposition to that there are some crimes that are just so awful that the death penalty is required. And, like, for instance, murdering law enforcement officers or murdering people in prison when you're already there, right? That type of thing, because there's no other deterrent for that. And just in the cause of justice. But you can't say that I'm opposed to the death penalty, except for these 3 guys over here it would look bad if I let them off death row. I mean, I
would look bad. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd look bad. It would, I can't I don't want to have to answer questions as to why I let two white supremacist murderers off of death row, plus the Islamist bomber that took out a bunch of people at the Boston Marathon in, was it 2013? I think it was like
that the Russians warned us about.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing too. Yeah, but I mean, if you're going to make that argument, you have to commute all 40 of them. And that's it. You have to commute all 40 of them, or you shouldn't commute any of them. And the reason why you don't commute them for that reason is because we've had this debate. And the will of Congress, and by extension, the will of the people who elect people to Congress, is that we should have a federal death penalty under, very limited circumstances. And
like Oklahoma City and stuff. Yeah,
like Oklahoma City, and Boston Marathon, and Dylan Roof, and the guy from Buffalo, who's the other one that whose sentence didn't get commuted. But also for the people who are, gouging out the eyes of little girls and raping them as they're dying, which is one of the guys that got off of death row, among the other people who were on there for very good reasons. If you support the death penalty.
If you support an idea that there is justice and we must enforce it in our society, everybody doesn't get a trophy and everybody doesn't get a pass, no matter what they do.
Yeah, look, I mean, and again, it's you have to do one thing or the other. You can't do both at the same time and then call yourself principled. This was nothing more than Joe Biden trying to use the power of clemency to dig at Donald Trump. Donald Trump had said that he wants to accelerate the process of executions so as to make this an actual deterrent, or at least to increase its deterrent value. There's all sorts of debate as to whether or not it's an actual deterrent or not.
Well, it's a deterrent for the convict.
That's right. They're not going to be able to kill anybody.
They're not going to do it. Yeah.
And a couple of these guys were convicted. At least a couple of these guys were the murders that they got the death penalty for were murders that they committed in prison. So again, you have to, your argument has to fit all of that, or it doesn't fit at all. And so people are, Tom Cotton's talking about Biden's incompetence and can't it be reversed on the basis of incompetence? We do that with contracts. Well, this isn't contract law. This is a constitutional grant of authority that is plenary and unreviewable as it stands right now. And I think the answer to this is you amend the Constitution to get Congress a role in reviewing and either approving or vetoing clemency actions. But it's going to take a constitutional amendment to do that. I hope that Tom Cotton is going to do something more than just tweet about this in the next session of Congress to do this. And I think it's actually a really good time to do it because Democrats are worried about what Trump's going to do with the pardon power. Republicans are disgusted with what Joe Biden did with it, especially pardoning the family bag man. And to be frank, some Democrats are kind of disgusted by that as well. There really may be an opening here to actually do something about this and pass a constitutional amendment that actually is effective towards it. But that's what it's going to take because it's a constitutional grant of authority. You can't limit it by statute, unfortunately. And if you're worried about the president being incompetent, and this is one of the points I make, then maybe he shouldn't have been in the office, especially after the June 27th debate, when everybody knew that this guy was non compos mentis for most of the day, and nobody did anything about it.
Right. In fact, the bargain was, well, okay, step off, and it was a political bargain, and it had nothing to do with the nation. You agree to give up the nomination, and we'll give it to Kamala, but you get to stay for 6 more months. Good God! So he's not good enough to be the next president, but he is good enough to be the current president. No, that doesn't fly. And I don't think there will ever be another constitutional amendment. I mean, I'm sorry. But if somebody comes up and wants to change the flag, I don't think Americans would agree on a national pie right now, let alone a national amendment.
All right. So what's your nomination for the national pie?
A chocolate cream.
Wow. Now there you go. That's an interesting answer. See, I thought you would have said apple pie because that's the
No,
American is apple.
no, apple, not apple pie. Or a second, close second would be raspberry, but I
See, for me, it's cherry pie.
cherry pie it's my personal favorite. But for a national pie, that would be a great excuse to have chocolate pudding in a pie. I mean,
Hard to argue with that.
there could be no argument with that. I mean, we would have all 57 states in ratifying that amendment if it was a chocolate pie. I
Oh,
think.
there you go. Yeah, Barack Obama would be would
Yeah.
definitely be on board with the 57 state ratification. So, all right, I want to get to the media thing
Oh,
because this is This is going to go up on Christmas Eve, so we're not going to do a huge long show today because we want to wish you a Merry Christmas and get to a couple of jokes too. But you were writing today, or really Sunday, excuse me. An epic confrontation of the new Trump and old media, what looms ahead. And at the same time, apparently, Axios is putting together an argument that the media is entering into a suck up moment, mainly because they're giving Trump an opportunity to that they're trying to engage him more honestly. And frankly, I think that what's ending is a decade long or a more suck up moment between the mainstream media and Democrats. I mean, that's how I see this, Andrew.
yeah. I don't see it ending. I mean, there's a thing called the honeymoon, and we will see story. Well, there'll be a succession of stories now that we have a Republican president. Long about March, there will be a big story, and it will be repeated in many media about the pressing crisis of homelessness.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I was saying that to somebody the other day too. Suddenly homelessness is going to matter
Suddenly
again.
homelessness is there was when I tweeted this or when I wrote this in the column, there was somebody that said, and he went back in the records and it was, I've forgotten when it was, but it's like a week after George H.W. Bush became president. Boom, there was the story about that. But this time, Donald Trump is devoting his entire salary, 400 grand, to the homelessness among veterans problem, which is very generous, also very wise. And I don't see it. There should be a built-in what's the word? Conflict between media and a president, but not just Republican presidents, which is the way it is now, or between Republican elected officials. It's a selective watchdog duty that the media has assigned themselves because they have totally, and this is what I said in the column, they have totally given up on the idea of fairness and objectivity. It's just, that's so passe, and we're now into woke, where you just have to fight for the issue, and anybody who's against what you're trying to do needs to be drowned out, silenced one way or another. I guess I'm old-fashioned, but I think old-fashioned was a good way of doing it. It was imperfect. No human can be totally objective, but you can work at it. And me and my colleagues back in the old days, as before the mid-90s, were conscientiously attempting to be objective.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, yeah, I think it was a different industry back then. We've talked about this too. This is it's structurally a different industry than it was back then, because this was not an industry that was staffed out of academia. And I think this is the biggest change. It's the reason why you've seen the industry transform itself into basically a propaganda machine for the left, which is that they are hiring people out of J schools rather than treating reporting as a skill which requires apprenticeship from the street level up.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why who was it? Ben Rhodes
Yeah.
in the White House was snarking about how it's so easy to pull the wool over reporters' eyes because they're all 25 years old and don't have any life experience, right?
And right, and they didn't have to schlep around a newsroom doing mundane chores as part of their apprenticeship, but all the while soaking up the values and mores of being a professional newsman. So they come in to the media as crusaders, and
Yeah,
anything they can do to document that works. If you look at the problems of made up stories, a lot of them were people that were pushed along for DEI reasons, and they did not endure. And it wasn't pleasant. I spent time as an apprentice. I enjoyed it because I was so eager to soak up everything and to get to the reporting business. Mine was shorter than many others, but it's invaluable. But now it's gone, and we're paying the price. Well, and the media companies are paying the price. I'm sorry, I made it seem like I was quitting. And last year there were more than 20,000 jobs lost in journalism. And rightly so.
It kind of reminds me of a passage from Ron Luciano's book, The Umpire Strikes Back. Now, Ron Luciano was a Major League Baseball umpire for many years. He had this running feud with Earl Weaver. And he wrote at least one, and maybe he might have written two very funny memoirs about his time in there. And he was talking about when he was first being trained to be an umpire, right? And this does relate to media. Just bear with me for a second. And he was saying, when you get into umpiring because you like baseball, right? You're a baseball fan. You probably grew up with a favorite team and all this kind of stuff. And he says, when you're being apprenticed into this, he didn't use the word apprentice, but that was really the process of this. You come up through, various types of little leagues or school league umpiring, stuff like that. And you get into the minors as a professional umpire, and you have to be apprenticed into this. And I don't have it in front of me, so I'm not going to be able to quote it exactly, but to paraphrase his thing, he apparently was asked at one point by the umpire who was training him, so who's your favorite player in the league? And he answered it honestly. And he says, wrong. They're all scumbags. You hate every single one of them. You don't have a favorite team. They're all scumbags. And you're going to work without having any favorites whatsoever. And that was kind of what I would assume, maybe not quite as floridly, but that was the effect of that apprenticeship model in the media too. Now people people have their opinions, they have their favorite approaches and that sort of thing, even as reporters, but they understood what the mission was, which was to report factually as to what happened without trying to call balls and strikes on it. You got to call balls and strikes when you did that job well enough for a period of years so that you could write a column where you could then decide that you've got favorites and stuff like that. But you didn't get that column until you had gone through whole lot of time as a reporter. And that's really the problem here, is that this direct academia to newsroom pipeline, first off, is putting a lot of people in newsrooms without any life experience whatsoever, except for being in a bubble, academia bubble. And secondly, it's these kids are carrying in the academia mission into the newsroom to the point where they're openly arguing that they should call balls and strikes rather than report honestly on the facts.
Yeah.
To serve the greater good.
Full disclosure, I went to a journalism school, but it would only be 30% journalism. The rest of it had to be academics. Mine was political science and history.
I was suspicious about you, Malcolm. I was always suspicious.
Well, you should be. You should be, especially with the stash. I mean, boy, if that's a credibility
stash right there, though.
See, that's right.
Counters all of that. The counterweight.
Right. Well, in Canada, mustaches are are much more predominant on men. I'm not addressing the ladies, especially on the police. The police, at least when we lived there, the police, it was just all the guys had mustaches, and now one of my sons has one. It looks pretty good for a
Well,
modern major.
all right. Total tangent. JD Vance has a beard and a mustache. When was the last vice president or president to have those?
What was it, Benjamin Harrison or somebody?
You know, well, you know, Teddy Roosevelt had the mustache at least, but I think that's the last president or vice president that featured facial hair. I mean, it really is kind of
it's very dominant. Yeah, I think
interesting.
he might. I think he might want to reconsider that, but that's it's his face, not mine.
Well, true. All right. So to get to your column, the epic confrontation of the new Trump and old media, what looms ahead? I mean, tell us a little bit about what you're seeing lying ahead, because I actually think that the media is a little tired of this at this point in time. It's been a losing strategy for them. And I think that they might be interested in trying to recoup a little bit of credibility by, I don't know, reporting honestly on what Trump is actually doing and putting it in an honest context. Do you see that, or do you think this is
no? I don't. I think they'd lose some suck up here in the honeymoon period because they need access, right? Now, but here's the truth: Trump grants access to everybody,
right?
Even the people that crap on him. He was the most accessible president, certainly in modern history. Sometimes the media would have 3, 4, 5 shots at him in a day on the way to the helicopter, getting out of the car. And this is in the first term, he was undisciplined because he would say things that answer things the media was asking him when he, in a PR sense, should have been changing the subject to his administration's message that week. So, I mean, he's president, he can do whatever he wants, but he would walk all over his own message at times. And I think that contributed to the sense of turmoil and during his first term that hurt him in the 2020 election. I hope he's more disciplined this time. Not just him, but all politicians have to be disciplined. You know, I mean, the classic is when the media asks you a question about the hot topic of the day. What do you think about Matt Gaetz's prostitution use? And you say, that's an interesting thing that Congress should be addressing. Another thing Congress should be addressing is my program on military security. You have to twist it. And I hope he does.
Well, I think he's learned some lessons. And
yes,
I think no doubt about it. Showed a little more, showed a little bit more discipline along those lines.
Oh, absolutely. No, I would say considerably more, especially on election night of all places. Usually they get all giddy and all that. And he's talking about the message of unity in his inaugural speech and introducing the first female chief of staff in White House history. And he's done a lot of that. And in his interviews that he's done, more interviews since the election than what's her name did before the election. So, I'm very hopeful. It's just that sometimes when the crowd cheers loudly, he gets off topic.
Yep. Well, we're just really about wrapping up the episode here. We've got a couple more minutes. Do you have any jokes?
I do have 2 or 3 of them. A man knocked on my door and asked for a small donation towards the local swimming pool. So I gave him a glass of water. the cable repairman was working on our TV cable repairman was working on our street. He asked me what time it was. I told him between 8 a.m. and 1 p.m.
Been
And
there.
yeah, I've been there. Boy, I'd guess. And another one is Dorothy Young recently died at the age of 103. She was Harry Houdini's stage assistant
Oh, wow.
while he was performing his magic acts. And her last words were, "Ta-da!"
Wasn't expecting that. Okay, that's pretty good. All right, I got a couple for you. A couple for you, and then we'll wish everybody Merry Christmas. College student picked up his date at her parents' house. He scraped together every cent he had to take her to a nice fancy restaurant, but to his dismay, she started ordering almost everything that was the most expensive thing on the menu: appetizers, lobsters, champagne, the works. And finally he said, "Does your mother feed you like this at home?" And she said, "No, but my mother's not looking to get laid either, pal." All right.
Hey-o.
Hi-oh, here's a cleaner one. So the little girl's sitting on her grandpa's lap, and she's running her fingers through the wrinkles on his face, and as she starts touching her own face and starts rubbing the wrinkles on her grandfather's face, and she says, "Grandpa, did God make you?" "He sure did, honey, a long time ago," Grandpa says. He says, "Well, did God make me?" And he says, "Yeah, and that wasn't too long ago." She says, "Wow, he's sure doing a lot better job these days, isn't he?" So that's a clean one. Yeah, I got to throw in a clean one, so. All right.
That's good.
Well, Merry Christmas to you, Andrew. Merry Christmas to everybody who's watching this.
Same to you and your family, all of our viewers, all of our followers, all of our readers. And I guess we'll see you in the new year, right?
Yeah, Happy New Year too, because we won't have a show next week, but we'll be back the week after that when we're in 2025. So stay tuned for that. Or kind of stay tuned for that. Just go enjoy yourself at Christmas time and New Year's. But Andrew Malcolm, the Prince of Twitter, the regent.redstate.com, at @AHMalcolm on Twitter/X, redstate.com, obviously, and right here on the Ed Morrissey Show every week. Andrew will talk in 2 weeks. And Merry Christmas to you.
Proud. Thank you. Same to you, sir, and your family, and proud to be your partner for all these years.
Absolutely. And I'm right back at you, my friend.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. See you later. Happy New Year.